Welcome to episode 4. Let's cover our next three topics.
Hello, we'll talk about the ocular drug administration routes. So let me bring on the screen share and then we'll start with it. Okay, ready? So as we'll study about the different routes of drug administration in our eye, oculus or bulba. So along with that, we'll also get to know about the different layers of eye in the different parts of eye. In the previous episode, we discussed about the different layers and different parts of eye. Now we'll see the section of eye. So we should remember that our eye is an oblate spheroid. And in this, along as we study the various routes of drug administration in eye, we'll get to know the different layers of eye. That is the layers of anatomy of the eye. So moving from inside to outside, the innermost layer is of retina. Outside it is the sclera. Then further outside is the conjunctiva. And the last layer, sorry, this layer right here is the Tenon's capsule. And this here is the conjunctiva. Okay. So when we inject a drug just beneath the conjunctiva, it's called the subconjunctival route of drug administration. Okay. And when we administer drug just beneath the Tenon's capsule, it is called subtenon injection, as we can go with the name, but the more appropriate name is parabulbar route. And when we inject injection in the anterior chamber, which is the part of the anterior segment, anterior chamber and posterior chamber constitute the anterior segment. So when we injection in the anterior chamber, it's called intracameral injection. These three injection. The fourth one is topical, or which can be in the form of eye drops or ointment. Now we prefer ointments over eye drop because it lasts longer in the eye. And in total, there are 7 routes of administration. So the fifth route is intravitreal, that is in the vitreal space. And the sixth and the seventh route, that is the retrobulbar and peribulbar route, are specifically or generally used for anesthesia. Now, before we head into the sixth and seventh route of drug administration, I'll explain you the orbit in which the eye is situated. Now, orbit is a pyramidal structure, we all know that. Now, these are the medial walls, and here, these are the lateral walls. Now, apex is at the most posterior part, and the base is in the most anterior part. Here is your eye. Now, you can see the muscles, the recti are attached to the eyes. Okay, so this eye is attached to these recti in the orbit. Now the space which is present inside the orbit, this space inside the orbit bound by the recti muscle is called the intraconal space. This intraconal space is where the retrobulbar injection is given. And the space otherwise here you can see is the peribulbar space, that is the extraconal space where the peribulbar injection is given. These two routes are used for anesthesia. Now, remember a few fun facts, not fun facts, but facts, that the volume of the orbit is 30 ml and volume of the eye is 6 ml. That's it. Thank you.
Hey guys, so today's topic is going to be chronic suppurative otitis media from ENT. So chronic, as you guys know, that it is for more than 3 months, and there will be permanent perforations in the tympanic membrane. So mostly the perforations will be present in the central area of the tympanic membrane, in the pars tensa. So the patient presents himself with hearing loss and with discharge from the external auditory canal, which is mucopurulent. And in acute otitis media, we have seen that it is fully purulent, but here it is mucopurulent, mostly mucoid discharge. So how do we manage it? Yeah, before that, I forgot to tell you that this CSOM is divided into two, which is safe and unsafe. Okay, so safe and unsafe. So I'm going to teach you unsafe in the next episode. Today I'm going to teach you safe only, safe or mucosal or tubotympanic CSOM. Okay, chronic suppurative otitis media. So the management for safe CSOM is we gave him antibiotics, which is both local and systematic, where we gave it till the infection is gone and the ear is dry. And secondly, after that, we follow it with the myringoplasty and the uh, ossicular ossicular plasty. Okay, so together we call this as tympanoplasty. Okay, so what happens here is uh, the most common ossicle to get necrosed or eroded is the long process of the stapes, followed by the long process of incus. Okay, so here the more damage happens to the incus and the stapes. Okay, the ossicles of the ear. So according to different types, we can manage it accordingly. Like type 1 is when the necrosis takes place till the malleus. Okay, and type 2 is when the necrosis is taking place till the half malleus as well as the half of the incus. Type 3 is whole malleus incus till the stapedincus joint. Okay, and type 4 is the whole part where it affects the stapes. Okay, so we put a graft accordingly, and the graft used is the temporal fascia. Okay, now the myringoplasty is done by two techniques. Okay, where there is an overlay technique and an underlay technique. An overlay technique is when we remove the fibrous layer of the tympanic membrane. So not fibrous, the epithelium, the outer epithelium of the tympanic membrane. As Akansha explained, there are three layers. There is the epithelium, outer, middle, fibrous, and the inner mucosal layer. So we remove the outer epithelial layer and we place the graft over the annulus of tympanic membrane. In the picture, the annulus is in the tympanic, the surrounding tympanic membrane, and to the medial of the handle of malleus. That means the perforation, as I said, is central. So this is the handle of malleus in the tympanic membrane, and this is the annulus, surrounding annulus. So we place it here, the graft. Okay. Then we have got the underlay technique where we remove the tympanic membrane as a whole. Okay, and we place it under the annulus of the tympanic membrane, and place it medially to the handle of malleus. Okay, so these are the two techniques of myringoplasty. Then a short thing, there is a partial ossicular replacement prosthesis. This is when in type 3, as I've explained, the erosion, it affects the malleus and incus wholly, right? So we can replace this with a prosthesis, because when you place a graft, so it is making a narrow path for a middle ear. It's going to be a lot of congestion. So we're going to keep it a prosthesis which can connect the tympanic membrane to the incus. So that helps. Thank you.
Akanksha.
So we are going to talk about Meniere's disease. So Meniere's disease is the distension of the endolymphatic sac. This occurs because of filling up of the endolymph. Now, the quantity increases because either due to increased production or due to decreased absorption, or both of them. So any of these leads to increased quantity of the endolymph in the endolymphatic sac. What happens because of this is the Reisner's membrane, it bulges out because of the pressure of the increased endolymph. Now, what can happen due to this are four cardinal features, that is tinnitus, sensory neural hearing loss, vertigo, and another one is yeah, oral fullness. So these are the four features, that is tinnitus, sensory neural hearing loss, vertigo, and oral fullness. Oral fullness means that your ear will feel full of something, like something is stuffed up into your ear. So these are the four features. Now, how do we diagnose it or examine it? Examination first, in the beginning, the examination is conducted by otoscopy. So on otoscopy, the tympanic membrane is visualized as the normal, as it appears normally. So there's no change in the tympanic membrane. Then we look at the nystagmus. Now the nystagmus has two components, slow component and fast component. So the fast component moves towards the better ear. So it goes like this, faster component and then slow returns, if this is the better ear, like this. And then the third is tuning fork tests. So on tuning fork tests, we do mainly Rinne's test and Weber's test. So the Rinne's test gives a positive test, and on Weber's test, the sound is lateralized towards the better ear. Why? Because it is sensory neural hearing loss, which is occurring. Then a few investigations are carried out, which can be pure tone audiometry, then speech audiometry, then electrocochleography is done, and some special tests are done like recruitment test, which comes out as positive, and another test known as CC, that is short increment sensitivity index. This test is also done. Other two tests are caloric test, which on caloric test, what do? We give a particular temperature water, a spray of water, a jet of water into the ear and look for nystagmus in the caloric tests. So on the caloric test for Meniere's disease, we observe a reduced response. And then glycerol test is also one of the tests which is done. Now coming to the diagnosis. The diagnosis is made on 4 levels. That is, it can either be certain diagnosis or it can be definite diagnosis. Then it can be probable diagnosis or it can be possible diagnosis. These are the 4 levels of diagnosis that we give. Now the first is certain diagnosis. Certain diagnosis is said when Meniere's disease is confirmed to have taken place by histopathological examination. So if we do histopath exam and we find signs of Meniere's disease, that means it is a certain diagnosis. Then coming to definitive diagnosis. Definitive diagnosis is said to have, we say that it's a definitive diagnosis when there are 2 or more occurrences of vertigo, definite vertigo, which are prevalent for a minimum of 20 minutes. So vertigo has to occur for at least 20 minutes, and there should be at least 2 instances of this sort to label it as a definite diagnosis. Then coming to probable diagnosis. In probable diagnosis, we find features of Meniere's disease, and it is said to be given when all other causes of Meniere's disease are, cancelled out. And then vertigo, there should be 1 definite episode of vertigo to label it as a probable diagnosis. Then comes the 4th one, which is possible diagnosis. In possible diagnosis, any episodic instance of vertigo and signs of Meniere disease when they occur, so we label it as a possible diagnosis. So here, now we come to treatment. Treatment is also given on certain levels. So first, coming to the general measures. General measures, the most important will be reassurance of the patient. Why? Because it's a very unsettling situation, and the patient, the sensations that the patient feels in the ear, it's not very nice. So we have to reassure that it will be fine and it will go away. That is the major treatment that can be given. Then if the patient is a smoker, we ask them to stop smoking, quit smoking. Then low salt diets and lower consumption of a lot of liquids. So we restrict higher consumption of liquids just to reduce the endolymph volume. Then other measures which are management of an acute attack. So again, for acute attack, we give reassurance to the patient, bed rest is given to them. Then we give vasodilators. Then vestibular sedatives are also given to them, so that the very uncomfortable situations of the vestibular apparatus are kind of suppressed. Then coming to the chronic attack. So for management of chronic attack, sedatives are also given, vasodilators are given, and in certain situations of hypothyroidism, hormone replacement therapy has also required to be given. Then the fourth one comes to surgery. So for surgeries, it can either be conservative surgery or a destructive surgery. Conservative surgery means we're not harming any structure as such. We're just doing something, manipulating the structure to reduce the symptoms. So this can include decompression of the nerve. Vestibular nerve is decompressed so that the pressure is released and the symptoms are relieved a little bit. Then comes endolymphatic sac shunt operation. So a shunt is placed so as to displace the pressure, reduce the pressure, and relieve the symptoms again. Then come destructive surgeries. Destructive surgeries such as labyrinthectomy can be done to reduce the uncomfortable symptoms. And one more thing is done, that is intratympanic gentamicin therapy is given. Now we know that gentamicin is not to be given to the ear specifically because it can be ototoxic. But when given to the vestibular apparatus when injected, then it can destroy, or in a way, some portion of the vestibular labyrinth is destroyed. So it provides a relief in that way. So that is the treatment. Thank you.